This is one of my proudest possessions. Obama. On the back it says '08, the election year. It happens to also be Cal Ripken's number, 8. This is a real trophy for me. And it was created right here in Bolton Hill. We think we know each other, but you know, there's always a surprise. My surprise on election night in 2008 was a promise to my wife that I was going to start a bonfire in the middle of Bolton Street to celebrate Barack Obama's election. It horrified my wife to think of it. She said, "Oh my God, the fire department will show up and they'll ruin your parade, and they'll spoil everything. They'll have to respond. No bonfires." I had wood stacked in the basement, ready to go, and at the last minute, sanity prevailed. I decided, okay, we'll skip that. I brought out my barbecue grill, put it on the street, grabbed an old television set, stuffed it in the front window, right at street level. Got a couple of coolers, filled them with ice and beer and wine, had hot dogs, and got my stereo set, put all the speakers in the second floor windows facing out at the street level. Queued it up with the Rolling Stones. And as night fell on us, people started to gather outside the front door. Just curiosity. Neighbors saying, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I can't do a bonfire, so I'm going to have a party of one kind or another." By the time it became kind of a cliffhanger and we were all wondering what will happen in Ohio. Everyone started pressing against the house, getting closer and closer to this tiny little television. It was just a little, like 14-inch square TV. And I remember I was inside the house looking out through the windows at the crowd that was watching the proceedings on the television. And as one, they would gasp. As one, they would cheer. As one, they would cry. They would dance. With kids outside, little kids, pots and pans and wooden spoons, rattling and banging and banging and banging. The street was closed. Cars stopped. People got out of their automobiles. We were dancing. I mean, it was black, white, gay, straight, old, young, MICA students, old guys, old people who would normally be in bed were out in the middle of the road. And we didn't quit till, I don't know, 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't even remember.
Years ago, I lived in this row home, and I'm hearing these moaning noise through the walls. And, you know, it could be anything. It could be somebody in pain. It could be sexual. It could be just people, you know, watching TV or doing whatever. I wasn't sure what I was hearing, but it sure sounded like somebody was having a good time to me.
What fascinates me is the way that, well, obviously, you know a lot about your neighbors. There's sounds through the walls that you can hear. You've got porches that you can look down and back porches that, you know, so you're kind of aware of neighbors. But then when you have kids, your kids grow up with a consciousness of life on a row of houses. You know, I raised my kids in a row house, and they got to see and hear all kinds of crazy things. You know, I mean, things like hearing people's sex life. I mean, that could be interesting, weird, upsetting for an adult. Who knows what it's like for a kid? So that has always been fascinating, and because we had renters on either side of our row house, so with apartments on each level, we got numerous different kinds of people, and depending on who would move in, it might be the room right next to my daughter's, or it might be the room right next to ours, or the kitchen even. So, you know, we would get to hear things like rock star sex for 2 hours, really freaking loud, or sometimes really upsetting sex, but, or, you know, the neighbor who experimented in getting a rooster, and kept a rooster in his backyard right above my daughter's room.
One of the things that's hard about falling asleep next door to neighbors that have a 4-year-old and like a 6-month-old is that at night when you're next to someone when you're next to the 4-year-old, who is sleeping, he is screaming at his parents to come up because he is either scared or wants water. So it's pretty hard to go to sleep when you're living in a row house sometimes.
Many years ago, 1938, there was a lady who lived in this house, actually lived in this house for 30 years till 1968, and she had a son who lived here for part of the time with her. Her son was a teacher at Boys Latin School and lived in the basement and built a large room that was paneled in pine. Well, unfortunately, the son was a heavy drinker, and particularly Maryland rye, which is not made anymore in Maryland. And one day he committed suicide in the room in the basement. When we bought the house, we found a variety of Maryland rye whiskey bottles that were underneath the floor. After a while, we heard at night some creaking. Now, I'm not really sure what it was, but we sort of attribute it to the son of this lady who lived here. When small children came over, they asked about the house, and we told them, well, we do have a friendly ghost living in the basement.
What? What are you saying to me? Are you saying to me that there's somebody buried under my brick floor? She said, I'm just saying. The reason to have a brick floor is because it's easy to take up part of it, not the whole thing.
We lived there for 12 years, and at a certain point we moved out because my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law and her husband were immigrating from Iran and needed a place to live. So we bought another house in the neighborhood and they moved into our old house. None of them spoke English very well, so it was a very new environment for them, and they had to get used to a lot of things. For one thing, they had to get used to the fact that there were gay couples living on either side of them, and coming from Iran, of course, that was a shocking sort of development. Extremely interesting that they could be open about it because, of course, in Iran, it's punishable by death. But anyway, I got a call one morning from my sister-in-law, and she was very concerned because there were police outside of the house. And I asked her what had been going on, and she said the night before they had heard bumps and thumps and music blasting. She said at one point they thought that people were running on the roof. And as it turned out, they actually had reason to be concerned because the next morning the police showed up. I came over with my daughter in time to witness them actually bringing a body bag out of the house. It was a black rubber-looking body bag all zipped up. And the fellow next door had been murdered, had been killed by his lover. And that's what they had been hearing all night long. Although it wasn't a fight, evidently. It was recreational. And ended very, very badly.
But there are so many stories about things that go on in houses next door to you. It's a shame. There are people who were conducting unlawful business in one of the buildings I lived in, and they were loud about it. So anybody that was in the law could hear what they had to say, and could easily make a raid and hit the house at the right time when everything was being conducted, or business was being conducted. But they would bring the stuff in, they'd be sitting in and organizing, and they'd be loud about it, how they was dishing it all out. And I could just sit there in my room and just hear what they had to say. I said, if I was the police, I would go right over there and make a raid.
She was just a great neighbor. And as an older woman, she passed away and left the house to her nephew. Now, her nephew was a ticket taker, a security guy for the MTA. He also never opened any of his windows. They were completely shut all the time with plastic over them. Some of them eventually broke, but he never fixed them. He just had plastic over them. The ivy vines grew into the windows. The ivy vines grew up the wall. He was, the house was in disrepair. He had one boarder who kept to himself and was a pretty nice guy, but the neighbor next door was a real evil son of a bitch. The fact that there was no access through the entire house. So either he's a hoarder, or he's a murderer, or he's just an asshole, but that's the story of our neighbor in Brooklyn.
One evening, we were sitting on our front porch, as we always do, having dinner, and the neighbors across the street started playing their radio really loud, to the point we couldn't hear our radio next to us that was playing NPR to hear the evening news.
So I walked over to them, I crossed the street and said hello, greeted them, and they looked at me skeptically, and I asked them if they would please turn their music down, which I'd asked them before. And they said, well, how about those white boys next to you who play their rock and roll so damn loud? To which I didn't have a good answer, except that I just didn't know that they played their music that loud. Because they said, well, what are you going to do, call the police? And I said, well, of course I'm not going to call the police. And so I just appealed to their sense of neighborliness.
They're curious about my dog, you may hear. And they ask funny questions. So you're white, huh?
The block by the train tracks are a pair of completely vacant, torn down lots from two old row houses. It's a lovely space for a garden, but until now it's been used as a dumping ground by both the neighborhood and the city at large. But this spring, through a little bit of city wrangling and government redocumentation, we have adopted these lots and taken them over. We started a garden, built some boxes, planted some plants, and hoped everything was going to work just fine. And it did for about 48 hours. I came back after a rainy weekend. It was a sunny day. I'm like, perfect, these little seedlings will have done great. I find they're all dead. Not just like wilted, but like as if they had been poisoned. As I'm ripping up plants, I start to smell my hands, and it's very strict. Like I'm like, what is that very familiar and terrible smell? And it's urine, not dog urine. It's definitely person urine, and it's definitely more than one session's worth of it. It is gallons upon gallons of piss covering our garden bed. A 3x8 bed, literally as if it had been drenched. In the ensuing weeks, as we replanted and just sort of gotten over it, information starts to trickle in from various neighborhood sources. You start to hear, oh yeah, I heard from so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so that they think they saw some old guy with a pink cooler dumping on your garden. Pink cooler? No one understands what this means. No one understands what's going on. We waited out, and eventually one of my neighbors says he figured out who did it. He says, oh yeah, I know who it is. I already talked to him. It was Dave, crazy junkie at the end of the block. And we're like, what? The guy who we see every day? The guy who sits on his porch every day and is like hanging out and talks to us all nice? Yeah, that Dave dumped piss on your garden. So how do you address maliciousness when you can't be in any way retaliatory or malicious yourself? Because again, you live with these people. You live on top of these people. They're not going anywhere. You are going to leave before they do. They have lived here 60 years. You have been there 6 months. So what do? You wait until Dave comes and talks to you to say that Dave thought he was fertilizing your garden. Dave thought very earnestly that urine, as he put it, was like manure, like fertilizer.
We had somebody wander in the yard once and say, oh, I'm just looking through the trash. But it was our trash. And it wasn't even the trash can. It was like just tools and piles of wood and piles of stuff. We're like, all right, well, I guess our stuff is trash to you, but it's still our stuff.
It was a Sunday. We were just sleeping. The kids were kind of watching cartoons, and our bedroom is in the front on the 3rd floor. The TV cartoon room was the 2nd room, and then there was like a deck, a roof behind that TV room. And you know, you could walk out there through the window, but there was no railing or anything like that. And our house didn't even have a fire escape. The other ones had a fire escape because they were rental units. And the kids walk into the bedroom one Sunday morning and they're like, "Dad, there's somebody out on the back porch." And of course I'm startled, but I get up and run to the back porch, half awake, and see that this is nobody awake or anything. This is some drunken from the night before fool from some crazy party, which we certainly had heard all night long, who was draped over my my roof edge, one arm over and his head partially over and most of his body and the other arm securing himself on the roof, but passed out cold. Look, man, you know, a quick push and you'd be off. You need to just chill. You woke up drunk on my porch. My kids, you know, showed me this. And so he kind of started to wake up and realized how badly he had fucked up, and scampered back into the window from which he came next door.
Yeah, so at least 6 months ago I'm sure we both noticed someone sitting on the steps pretty regularly when we were either coming or going. And then we noticed, and so we thought, oh, well, maybe they got a new tenant, because I don't know what's going on with the building. No, it's not my deal. And then we noticed someone was sleeping in the vestibule. So we've talked about this at length, about how to handle it, and neither one of us wanted to involve the police, because that seems like it's not really a good solution for the person, because obviously if he were able to handle situations like that, he probably wouldn't be living in a vestibule next door. And so I called the city to see if they had any recommendations, and the best they said was that they could come out and winterize the property, so they would board it up. And we both thought, well, that's not really what we want to be living next to either. There's not really an owner to speak to.
Well, thought process before the bank owner was to get a lock and lock the door. So I did some research, and I mean, I actually probably could have got the stuff, but I procrastinated. It's a weird situation because, I mean, I've lived sandwiched between people my entire life, and for the most part, through all of that, have always tended to feel a closeness or a bond with like whoever is next to you, just out of sheer proximity. But this situation is a lot different in the sense that, like, he is, I'm just going to say sleeping there. I mean, that's pretty much all I've seen. I haven't smelled any weird odors or, like, saw any craziness. So I'm just going to say he's sleeping there.
He's not friendly. And
Well,
I'm sure there's a good reason for that.
Why
But
would he be friendly?
if I
He's
think you
living
would,
on the edge of reality.
Right. He clearly knows where we live. And so if there are issues of mental instability, I don't really want to open up that can of worms either. So, yeah, we're kind of passive, passively dealing with it and assuming it will resolve itself at some point. And he hasn't done any harm. He's done no harm. It's just awkward. It's just weird and awkward and sad.
Well, when we first moved here,
and how we actually met our neighbors.
which was
Coming out of their front door on a stretcher.
Upstairs, in our brownstone, were the neighbors, James and Grace, their daughter, Betty, Betty's daughter, Wanda, and then Wanda had a child, Turquan, who James always called Onion, Onion. They got older. You could hear noise going down the stairs because it was a rickety, creaky building with just plasterboard walls dividing the upstairs and the downstairs. So you could hear Grace had a stroke or an ailment. And, she had caretakers, and Betty was there. We didn't pay much attention to the noise, and you'd often hear a thump, 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 and various other sort of scraping noises. Brunch across from the city park in New Orleans, I believe it was one of the Brendan's restaurants. I don't remember the name of the place. And we get a phone call, and from Betty. Betty's calling because they have burned out a socket And I'm like, well, I don't know what you want me to do. I'm in New Orleans. I'll be back tomorrow. But, and so I said, you can go in the basement and you have the keys and you can reset the circuit breaker. And I was like, well, what did you do? And it turns out we get back and go to see what the problem is, because they then burn out an actual socket, not just trip the circuit breaker. They had moved in an entire ICP unit, the bed that monitors the body, trachea tube and mister, removable beds, and what you were hearing was a compressor, the thump for this woman who was essentially in a coma, though they didn't want to admit to that. And also in the room was an oxygen tank, and Betty smoked. It got more peculiar when 1 o'clock in the morning or something, you hear screaming and hollering, "Mama, Mama, please don't leave us, don't leave us." Then you hear the sirens, then you hear the door being opened or almost kicked in, people tromping up the stairs. And I just would get out of bed, run downstairs, go in the kitchen, close all the doors, get a bottle of whiskey, because Grace had died. However, EMS was very efficient. They brought her back. This happened 2 more times. I did attend both James's and Grace's funeral.
It's always hard to get to sleep living in a row house, because one time I was upstairs and I had been woken up by, I heard a huge thump next door, and about 15 minutes later, our neighbors Josh and Nicole called us and had said that Josh had fainted, and my dad went over to sleep with their kid, whose name is Mo, and it was just crazy.
We're asleep, and I hear this huge thunk in the middle of the night.
I did not.
He did not. So I elbow him, and I'm like, "There's a big thunk. It's next door. What do we do?" But I realized that I was sort of uncomfortable calling next door to say, "We heard a big thunk in your bedroom," because that seemed like maybe just a little too close. Like, do you let people know what you're hearing next door or not? So we lay there. You try to go back to sleep, and I, of course, was worried.
I did go back to sleep.
But the nice thing is that, of course, our neighbor, Nicole's husband, had fainted, and they did need our help. And so Jeff was able to go over and babysit the baby while they went to the hospital.
A kid who was living here that was bit by a neighbor's dog, and I surprisingly got really upset and very maternal about this poor kid, and he was like a 20-something-year-old college student. He wasn't that young, but I he was crying, and I took him and we marched down the street, and then I forever made an enemy with another neighbor.
The story that I told to Dawn had to do with my next door neighbors. They're right on the other side of the wall here. God bless that there was a hidden child in the house for quite some time, which is weird because I would hear these insane rants, like profanity, but it sounded like an adolescent boy, meet the wife, and she would just barely speak in a whisper, I see her on the porch, she's a smoker, so she's out front and back smoking all day, and she speaks in just barely a whisper, and she's kind of shy and demure, and and I just felt, this poor woman has this, troubled, deranged son to deal with, and, well, it turns out that was her. The yelling person is her. She calls her husband all kinds of names, this, that, the other. So once I realized that, and the way I realized it was she was halfway out the door and doing it one day, and then I never heard him yell back once. So I started on a mission to make her stop. So I have this band, there's a local band called Creepy Myrtle. I actually think they broke up, but they made this awesome CD that I loved anyway. So I just blare, and it's like a rock, like a punk rock kind of a thing. And I just blare it every time she started, and the point being, I can hear you. So she almost never, ever does it. She's kind of got a Saturday morning thing she can't help, where she loses it. But she used to do it every day. Now she pretty much only Saturday morning, so I hope I've made his life better. Me and creepy Myrtle. That's my story.
This is a story of a house and an evil villain.
This area behind me here is a passage that goes out to the street. There's a trapdoor out on the street so that coal deliveries could be made right to the front of the house, combining affluent living with city delivery. So when I came down, there are 2 rings hanging from the beam right there. And when I first saw this house and I saw those rings and started imagining what those were there for, it kind of creeped me out. But this passage back here is one that I have never explored. I don't want to be there. It's dark. The door is falling apart. It's gross. And then I had a guy come here to talk about redoing the windows in the front. And I brought him down here and I said, you might as well do that door on the trap door as long as you're doing the windows. And he came in here and he went all the way down to the street, and I stood back here with a flashlight saying, nervously, there are boards there, be careful, be careful. Oh, look, there are windows there. I can't believe I never went and sounded those. And oh, what is that? But not going down there myself. And he looked and he figured out what needed to be done with the door, and he came back and we were going upstairs and he said, so how long you had a ghost down here?
Okay, so we've moved into the house of our dreams. We're very happy there. And my husband's son has major hip surgery at the age of 30. So he is staying in the carriage house on the ground floor because we put in a full bath, etc. His wife is staying on the 2nd floor. She comes down one morning and says, what were you guys doing upstairs last night? And we look at each other. We weren't upstairs last night. And my husband's son couldn't walk up because he'd had major hip surgery. He literally could not make it up a flight of stairs. So we looked at her and said, we weren't. And she said, look, I felt there was somebody. A few weeks later, we were at an alley party. And we were kind of laughing about this. And then some of the older neighbors around our little square kind of looked at each other and said, well, the previous owners who were selling to you kind of decided they wouldn't tell you, but there's a ghost in the carriage house. This ghost is a legend in the neighborhood. And this ghost is the ghost of an old groom, but a groom who back at some point in time was living on the top floor of the carriage house, which even when we moved in could only be accessed by a ladder. This ladder had not been very safe. Apparently he'd been out drinking, or had been drinking in his quarters, fell down the ladder, broke his neck. And apparently the ghost has been seen a bunch of times sitting on the big hearth on the ground floor of the carriage house, drinking a beer, sometimes with a wench. And Ron and I have never seen him. My husband and I have never seen him, have never seen the wench. Love to find out the secret of who this ghost was. But because this ghost was, from the legend, a servant, probably not a slave, because by the time the house was built, most of the African Americans in Baltimore were freedmen, although obviously they would still have been working in positions of being servants or grooms, and they were never listed in the census files.
Mine, I got some crazy stories. One was my neighbor, my old house I used to live in. They would come home in wee hours in the morning. I'm sleeping, and I hear all this talking and music playing and the same tune over and over and over again. It's repetitious. And then it gets quiet, and then I'll hear all these moaning sounds. And they're getting it on in the house, and they're right next to my bed, And then they get up in the morning when I'm outside trying to clean up. So they're complaining about me making noise doing the lawn and stuff, but they've been up all night having a good time. But here I'm up at regular time doing what should be done, like trimming the yard and everything, like taking the trash out and all this, and they complaining about it.
And we live in a multi-family house. So we have our family that lives downstairs, and then we rent out apartments in the rest of our house for everyone. When we first moved in, I found a stranger in our laundry room, and I was like, what the hell are you doing here? And apparently he had been doing laundry in our laundry room for several months because someone had given him a key, and it was his free place to do laundry. So that stopped right there.
and he went buck naked. Now he's a flaming redhead. He's out on the back porch on the second floor, level with their back porch, second floor. And he's standing out there and he says, "Just go to the fucking IHOP already." And they all looked at him and they got really scared and they ran in the house and disappeared. And they never talked on the back porch again.
There was this wonderful lady who lived 2 row houses down. Wonderful, I mean, I didn't really know her. You don't always know people when you live in row houses, but clearly just a hard-working lady. And then one day I was at a restaurant and she was the waitress, and so like I got some idea of who she was, and we had chatted a little bit, but I didn't even know her name. And one day I'm looking out the back, and she used to come in through the back and go up her fire escape and go in through the 3rd floor window where she lived. And I look over and see her coming up the stairs, and she's wearing a purple dress, and she goes in, and I hear like a little bit of rattling, and then I look out, and the corner of my eye I see a purple figure falling to the ground, and it was horrifying, because and I rush 911, I run out the back, get 911, I say, I don't know, police and fire and ambulance, somebody I think just fell off of a fire escape, and I run around, and it turns out the basement was where the laundry was, and she had a big purple duffel bag that she had tossed out of her window, so that she didn't have to lug it down all those stairs.
Okay, when you see the lady on the first story, when you finally see her, she comes out the house, everything is in its place, perfect. She looks like she's an angel, like she wouldn't do nothing. But yet and still you hear all this ruckus going on in her house at night, I mean, in the wee hours of the morning. So what you see a lot of times on the street is not always who they are once they get home.
And when we first started living here, our landlords told us that they kept the light on upstairs in the bay window in the back all night long because they were raising a turtle, and the turtle needed light all night. So we created a whole story that maybe they really did have a turtle, the turtle was getting bigger and bigger, and that someday we'd be invited over for turtle soup, but it hasn't happened yet.
One morning, it was a Sunday morning, it was always Sunday morning because this was a recurring situation. For a couple months straight, I would hear, and most of the time I slept in, but sometimes I was up early, and I would hear this strange sound kind of echoing through the building, sort of a it almost sounded like a peacock. One morning I really had to go grocery shopping. I was at a creamer or something. It was Sunday morning, and there was the sound, this and I didn't think of anything of it until I got downstairs, and it got louder, and I get down to the first floor where my unassuming neighbor Peter or Steven, I can't remember his name, but he lived in there, and that's where the sound was coming from. It was this, and it was almost unidentifiable, but I could tell at this point that it was human, but I wasn't about to pry, but I finally stepped outside, and inevitably had to walk by the window where I could see clearly through the window the loft bed of Steven, and really nailing his girlfriend from behind in a fantastic fashion. She was quite a screamer, but her screams were this unintelligible, and it finally all came together, and I finally discovered the sound, and decided to do my shopping on Monday nights after that. So there you go.
I heard, people running up and down the steps right next door, and this happened just yesterday. And before that, I heard, the emergency unit outside, and heard the door downstairs, heard people go upstairs, run up and down the steps, step out to find that the neighbor next door was actually having either a heart attack or a stroke. But
we had a pair of trees and a shrub ripped from the ground last weekend. Literally just straight up taken, and a handful of ornamental plants. It almost defies expectation what happens in Remington, just on the regular. Because if you had stolen some plants from a garden, you would think you would take them somewhere where the people who planted that garden might not see them. But instead, my neighbors in their full glory planted my plants not 50 yards from the garden in their front yard.
What do you let them know that you know about them, and what do you not let them know, and
Yeah.
that sort of thing?
Yeah.